Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 35, a question. And really what he's doing is he's countering the skeptics who are questioning the resurrection for the Christian. You'll see it in verse 35. He says, but someone will say. Now, we don't know who that is. We can only surmise. There were people at the church of Corinth who were asking this question or questions. He says, but someone will say, how are the dead raised? And with what kind of body do they come? So finally, if you've been with us now for the last month or so, we're finally hitting, in this famous chapter on the resurrection, we're finally hitting the core issue. And you'll remember if you were here the last few weeks, Paul started by taking us backwards. Remember he said Jesus was raised from the dead, and he appeared to Peter, and he appeared to James, and he appeared to the 500. And then he said, he took us forward, and he said, one day all of you, if you're a follower and a believer in Christ, you're going to be resurrected too. And Jesus is going to come back. He's going to put his enemies underfoot, and he's going to take this globe, this ball of dirt, and hand it back to the Father in all of its perfected glory. And then last week, if you were here, remember he went not backward and forward, but present, and he said, if you believe in that, if you believe in the resurrection, it should change the way that you what? The way that you live today. It should be impacting the way you live today, the way you give today, the way you sacrifice today. It should be impacting and driving the very core of your being, is what he said. And now finally he gets back into the flow of thought, and he answers the core question. How does this work? How do these little broken shells of a body that we have, our skin, which is so wrinkly and saggy, how does it go into the tomb or into the grave or the cemetery or cremated from dust to dust and then be resurrected to be with the Lord? And probably what was happening, to be honest, where there were some skeptics there at the church of Corinth who were saying, like skeptics of every era do, well, that's impossible. All right, this is the most foolish thing we've ever heard of. You know, the idea that there's going to be a resurrection. I mean, how does that work, Paul, when a body's cremated? You mean to tell me that that body's going to be torn apart and then basically it's all going to be put back together again? Or Paul, how about when they take it over an airplane over the Pacific and they dump it all out into the ocean? Or Paul, what about when the minnows come up and they eat your body? You mean to tell me God's going to take all the particles and he's going to put them back together? Paul, you're an idiot. Or how about this one? Paul, what if I'm standing right on top of their tombstone? When this all happens, is he going to have to go right through my body? By the way, I've actually had people say that before, right? It's usually come from one of my kids around the table. You know, well, how does that work, Dad? So we know that there were skeptics here that were asking these hypothetical what ifs. And Paul doesn't answer all of them, right? But he gives us enough to build a pretty strong case that there is going to, in fact, be a resurrection from the dead. And so if you're a note taker, you can go ahead and just follow along. Number one, which I just alluded to, is really the resurrection protest. And we'll put that on the screen. In fact, it looks like we already did. There it is. So you have a protest, a group of skeptics, and they're pushing back on this resurrection idea. And so Paul steps into the matter with number two here in your notes. You ready? A resurrection picture. He's going to give a series, basically 3 everyday pictures that point to the reality that God can do whatever God wants, including resurrect our bodies. And you'll see that there beginning in verse 36. Someone will say, well, how are the dead raised, and with what kind of body do they come? Look at Paul's answer. Anyone who asks that, Paul is a sensitive guy. He's a kind man. He's a gentle fella. You fool. Now, I don't want to be a fool, and I don't think you want to be a fool. So when an author of the Bible, remember the big A is the Holy Spirit, the little a author is the in this case, Paul. When the author of the Bible says you're a fool for asking this or not believing this, then we need to lean in. And then he goes on and he says, that which you sow, referring to farming terms, when you put a little seed in the ground, doesn't come to life unless it dies. Think about a little seed in the dirt. And that which you sow, when you put a little seed in the ground, you do not sow the body which is to be, but a bare grain, perhaps of wheat or of something else. Meaning you don't put a sunflower in the ground, you put a seed in the ground. But it comes out a sunflower. But God gives it a body just as he wished, and to each of these seeds a body of its own. Then 39, another picture. All flesh or skin, just picture your skin, is not the same kind of skin. But there's one skin of man, and another skin of beasts, and another skin of the birds, and another of fish. And then the third picture in verse 40, there are also heavenly bodies and earthly bodies, referring here to the sun, the moon, and the stars versus the earth. But the glory of the heavenly is one, and the glory of the earthly is another. What you look at when you stare out into the universe and the galaxy is something far different and bigger than what you're experiencing here upon the earth. In verse 41, there is one glory of the sun, and another glory of the moon, and another glory of the stars. For star differs from star in glory. And I hope you can kind of get the overall idea here. That there's these three little pictures, kind of molecular, biological, and celestial, and they're all showcasing the different aspects of God's creational power. And what he says is, hey, listen, if you say that God can't raise someone from the dead, you're a fool, because he's doing things like that all around you every day. Now, let's go ahead and just work through them real quickly. Let's look at each one. Look at the first one in verse 6. And if you're a note taker, you could just write this there in the margin next to verse 37. He starts with the seed. I put them all in S's, the seed, the skin, and the star, because I like to alliterate. All right? Look at it, verse 36. That which you sow, meaning you're a farmer and you put something into the ground, little seed, doesn't come to life unless it dies. Now, hopefully we all know that the seed that goes into the ground, anybody here do like herbs at their house? That's been a fun thing recently that a lot of people get into. You know, you have a little herb garden and a little box, and then you put in a little, what do you plant? I don't know I don't remember. Onions? No. What do you put in there? Come on. Rosemary, right? Everyone does rosemary because we like steak, right? And so you put a little rosemary seed in there, you put a little 4 or 5, put a little inch of dirt on the top, and you water it, put in partial sun, and then, whoop, what comes out, right? So you put the seed in there, and hopefully everyone understands germination. The seed goes in and the seed dies, it decays, it actively loses its consistency, and then there's a rebirth, and what comes out is way different than what goes in. You didn't take a stalk of rosemary and put it in the ground. You put a seed in the ground, and then that germinates, and it comes out something entirely different. Now, if you were from another planet this morning, I'm not saying you are, but like if you were, and you were an alien, you get transported onto planet Earth, and you met a farmer, and you never heard anything about crops and planting and the way biology works and all that stuff, and he said to you, yeah, we take this little tiny molecule piece of, brown stuff, and we put it down there in the other brown stuff, and then what comes out is something entirely different. Like picture a sunflower seed, and then what comes out is one of these 6-foot sunflowers. The alien's going to look at you and go, that's crazy, man. And yet we all just assume it to be fact because we've seen it so many times. And that's the point that he's making here. God is doing things like this all around us. 3 things about this picture, if you want to write them down there in the margin. Ready? Number 1 is he says there's got to be a death. Number 2, there's got to be an identity. There's going to be a same identity. And number 3, there's going to be a difference. And hopefully you already picked that up from the word picture, right? Number 1, he says there's got to be a death. Death is not an obstacle for God, it's a condition. For a germ to, or for a little seed to eventually germinate and become a flower, it's got to die. So death is not an obstacle, that's just part of what God does. So number 1, there's going to be a death. Number 2, however, there's going to remain, ready for this, an identity, he says. An identity means that if you put, in his example here is a little piece of wheat, a little wheat seed into the ground, it's going to come up as a sunflower, right? Of course not. It's going to come up as wheat. If you put a sunflower seed into the dirt, it's going to come up as a sunflower. If you put a rosemary seed into the dirt, it's going to come up as rosemary. That's the point that he's making with people as well. There's got to be a death, but then what's going to eventually be resurrected in a new form out of the ground is still going to be the same identity, and that person, it's not going to change. You're not going to have a human go into the dirt and then come out a cow. So reincarnation is wrong, and everyone's wrong in India. If I go in as Tony, guess what? I'm still coming out as Tony. So there's going to be a death, there's going to be an identity, but there's also, here's the key one, he says there's going to be a massive difference. You go in 1.0, but you come out a sprout. You come out 2.0. You come out entirely different from the way that you went in. Friends, that's very important to remember when it comes to our own coming resurrection, our new bodies. Is you're going to go into that grave, and your 1.0 body is going to go dust to dust, but then you're going to have the same identity when you come out, and you're going to be different. You're going to be 2.0. Like, think about this morning your iPhone. Everyone has iPhones nowadays, right? No one would ever buy an Android. I know you wouldn't. You just wouldn't do that. Not in Orange County at Mission Bible. We would never, right? So, do you remember your iPhone back in 2010? Like version, I don't know what that was, like 4 compared to like your 14. Now, if you pull both of them out, on the outside, they look basically the same. I mean, one's a little larger now, and it's got like 89 cameras on it. But it's still, an iPhone is still looking like an iPhone, but let me ask you, because of all the updates and the different versions, is the inside the same anymore? No. It's entirely different. And what he says is that as people, we also are going to go on the ground 1.0, we're going to come out 3.0, 4.0, 5.0, we're going to come out so much different than when we went in, no one would ever recognize us. And he'll talk more about that here in a second. So look at verse 39. Look at the next picture. The next one. He says, all flesh is not the same flesh. And what you could do is, this isn't seeds now. We're talking about skin. So you could just put another word there in next to verse 39. All skin is not the same skin, but there is one skin of men and another skin of a beast and another skin of a bird and another skin of fish. Now, I don't think anyone in the modern scientific age is going to disagree with that, right? Everyone knows that your skin is made of a different cellular content and structure than a fish, right? Everyone knows that? So we don't need to go any further? Okay, who's had sushi? Does sushi feel the same in your mouth as roast beef? Oh, of course not. Absolutely different. In fact, scientists say, get this, if you take one cell, scientists say, and you put it under a microscope, they can tell you whether it comes from a bird, whether it comes from a fish, whether it comes from a beast, or whether it comes from a human. That's the point that he's making right here. Is that the version of skin that you have on you does not have to be the only version of skin that God ever gives you. He's already proven that he can make a whole bunch of kinds of skin. He can make any kind of skin that he wants. And so when people say, well, he can't reassemble it, and he can't change the metaphysical properties, and he can't bring all the particles back from under the ocean when the minnows eat the cremated dust, God can't do that. Paul says he's already doing stuff like that all the time. Just look around you at what he's made. Which leads you to the next one. Look at verse 40. Here's the third picture he gives. He says, there are also heavenly bodies and earthly bodies, but the glory of the heavenly is one, meaning the stars, the sun, and the moon, the way they shine. And the glory of the earth is another, the way that it sits here. And going back to the pre-scientific age, he's just pointing out the fact that here you have these luminaries off in the distance, and somehow, although they're light years away, they're impacting the tides and the seasons and the heat of earth. And he says, we already are seeing God do things we cannot comprehend with our current scientific mind. So let me try right here, if I can, to just sum up Paul's argument for you, okay? Here's the way his argument goes. He's basically taking the science of his day to point out that God already creates in diverse ways that are far beyond what molecular biology, cellular biology, astrophysics, and quantum theorists could ever do. And he says God is already doing things like this that we cannot comprehend. Now, by the way, if you're in the room and you're a scientist and you hear me saying things that are incorrect, don't come up to me afterwards and go, you know what? You said molecular and it really is cellular, and you do your job, I'll do mine, okay? There's always two people in the room, and they're ready to come up and go, well, technically, now listen, I'm a preacher. All right? So if I get the terms wrong, I just want you to get the big idea, okay? The big idea is if Paul were here today, he would say, okay, you guys are all pretty scientific. You guys are all pretty advanced. I mean, you're doing a lot when it comes to the cloning. Everyone remember the dolly, the sheep in 1996? What a big deal that was? All right? So I'm going to get my terms wrong here, but I believe they took a cell, all right? So now, please don't get mad at me here, but they say with DNA, when they first discovered DNA, that there was like 600 octodecillion amino acids inside of every cell, and that means that every grouping and every individual, see, some of the scientists are already getting mad. They're not called amino, they're ribonucleides. I don't care. The point is they originally were saying every single blade of grass is unique because inside of it there's enough amino acids that distinguish every cell from every other cell, and that's what they were saying. And here we did, as humans, we took that cell, one little cell, and we made an entire sheep that came to life. Her name was Dolly, and she lived for 7 years. Everyone in the room goes, duh. It's called cloning. Now, all Paul would say if he were here to a modern audience is he would go, you did it. Did you not take the cell and put it in a petri dish and birth life? That was entirely different than what it was before. And everyone would go, yeah, I guess that just happened about 20 years ago. And then Paul would say, oh, do you think maybe God could catch up with you, you witty humans? Maybe one day God will be as smart as you. Maybe one day he'll be a scientist too. Maybe one day he'll be able to do something as good as Dolly the sheep. And you can see how all of a sudden he's beginning to step in and build a case to go, yeah, of course God could do this. Of course God could resurrect the body and make it new. Which leads us to number 3. Look at this. From the protest to the picture to the parallels. Here he comes kind of at the heart, to the principle of the matter in verse 42. After those 3 pictures, he says, so also. See, he paints the pictures and he gets everyone agreeing, well, sure, God could do this. He's already doing this. And then he talks about us. So also is the resurrection of the dead. And then you have a series of parallelisms. And by the way, parallelisms, whether it's synonymous or, this is a sidebar, this will bore you to death. Whether it's synonymous or whether it is an antithetical, you're always looking at the second line as the emphasis, okay? So read it that way. Here we go. He says, so also is the resurrection of the dead. Think about your body. It is sown, meaning it's a little seed that goes in the ground, a perishable body, but it's raised an imperishable body. It is sown, that little seed into the ground, in dishonor, but it's raised in glory. It is sown, that little seed, into weakness, but it is going to be raised in power. And it's sown a natural little body, but it's going to be raised a spiritual one. You got to see the heartbeat of what he's doing there? Just like the seeds. And the way that God can create and recreate the skins. And the way that God decided what were the heavens and the sun, the moon and the stars, and where the earth would be, he also is going to do something just as dramatic in your body. And right here in these little verses, 3 of them, we find really the most detailed explanation of the new body in the entire Bible. In prose. Not in picture, okay? So if you got a pen, just write these down. I'm going to go through them real quick. Here we go. You want to know what your new body's going to be like? You want to know, after you die, what you're going to come back as and live forever as? Here he gives us some of the description. Number 1, he says it's going to be, you ready? More durable. More durable. It's right there in verse 42. The seed that was buried perishable sprouts imperishable. Now, we all know this, right? We all know that we're currently living in a body that's going to die. It sags. Your body sags. Oh, I'm not looking at anyone. I'm looking on, you're generally speaking. Some of you young people, you're like, my body don't sag, I was talking to a guy earlier. He's telling me where he lives, some hot part of the planet, and he was telling me, he didn't bother him. I said, that's because you take your shirt off and you walk around. You still feel good about the way you look, right? Some of you young people go, I don't sag. Oh, you will. Give it 10 years. Let's talk, okay? Gravity is working against you every day. It's coming for you, and it's going to win. It's going to win, right? And the body smells, bodies get smelly, and they get stinky. and they die, and they decay, they get gangrenous, and the moment you were born, you already begin to die. And whether you are the strongest Arnold Schwarzenegger or The Rock, it doesn't matter how muscular you are and how great your immune system is, the reality is that even a microbe can take you out, or a spider. You take The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, walking around with all big time, and then you put him next to a brown recluse and watch what happens. Woo! It doesn't matter how strong you are. Every one of us has a body that's going to die. But guess what? Even as this old body's winding down, that new one's going to be revving up forever. He says it's going to be imperishable. In fact, who here is old enough to remember the old commercial with the little pink bunny? You remember that? And everywhere he goes, he's doing his little drum. Boom, 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 boom. And then there was a tagline underneath the Energizer Bunny commercials that said what? Do, 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 do. Still, that's going to be you. Era after era. Eon after eon. Epic after epic. After this body goes into the dirt, the new body is going to continue going and going and going and going. And just when you think you can't go a second longer, you're going to be going again. Which leads us to number 2. He says it's not only more dependable, your new body, he says in verse 43, is going to be more honorable. And this one excites me even more than not dying. He says the seed that was buried in dishonor, which, by the way, that word in the Bible, you can trace it around, refers to our sin, our shameful behavior. And he says the seed that was buried in dishonor, it's going to sprout in glory. Now, often we don't think about this, right? When you became a Christian, we'll talk about this here in just a moment, you became a new creature in Christ on the inside, but you're still wearing the old earth suit on the outside that did all the sin and does all the sin. All the shameful stuff. That's why Romans chapter 3, 10-16 talks about the fact that it's the lies of the lips and the throat and the eyes and the ears and the feet that run to evil and the hands that made all those mistakes and fought and hated. You're living in the shell of sin still. But one day you're going to be released from it. And I don't know about you, but that's the thing I'm most excited about. It's not the fact that I'm not going to die. It's not the fact I'm going to get to what we'll talk about here in a second, going to float around a little bit. All that stuff's good. The thing I'm most excited about is the fact that I'm going to forever please and forever praise my Lord, and I'm not going to be entangled anymore in a decrepit, decaying body of sin. I don't know about you, but I absolutely hate when I get up in the morning and I get on my knees and I go do my reading in the Word, devotion, and I come charging into the office ready to take the day for the Lord. And on the way in, zing, there comes a thought. And out of this flesh principle, this old skin with all of its memories and all of its dastardly consequences, that thought anchors me and it ruins me and it tears me down. And I have to rise up in Romans chapter 6 and I have to make sure I remember I've got victory and I have mastery over that sin. But oh, that sin remains, Romans 7, and it wages war against me on the inside. And I absolutely hate it and I cannot wait for it to be gone. Right? It's going to be gone. He says it's going to be more honorable. Number 3, look at this one, more powerful. Look at verse 43. The seed that's buried in weakness sprouts in power. I mean, you think about this planet and how even the most academic and scholarly of minds are limited by the frailty of their brain, right? The most scholarly of endeavors are limited by the frailty of the brain. Or some of you are the most adventurous people. You want to climb every mountain that you possibly can, but you're limited by your geolocal realities. Or some of you are sitting here and you're a person who wants to transform the world as a leader, but you're limited by your time. You know, guys like Churchill and Roosevelt all said the same thing. They hated the fact that they were dying so quickly because they had so much more they wanted to do. And you're a type A leader like that. The reality is one day that capacity is going to become limitless. And you're going to serve the Lord and take more territory for the Lord, and you're going to help do great things for the Lord in the kingdom without stopping, without de-energizing. Which leads us to the last one. Not only is it more dependable and more honorable and more powerful, but look at this one, it's more spiritual. See verse 44? The seed was buried in a natural body, but it sprouts a spiritual body. And all he's referring to there is kind of what I just alluded to, that you're no longer going to have the temptations of sin. In fact, this might help you picture it, okay? The old preachers used to call this our earth suit versus our heavenly suit. Have you ever heard that before? Anybody heard that before? Okay, I don't want to creep anybody out, but right now, according to the Bible, I'm wearing an earth suit. So inside of me is a soul. If you're a dichotomist, for example, inside of me is a soul, and then on the outside of me is my body. And then one day, relatively soon, many of you will still be alive, I'll die, but my soul I don't die. My body dies, but not my soul. So when that little monitor finally flatlines, it's going to happen to you too, by the way. My body's going to die. I'm out of here. I'm not stopping. According to Paul, I'm absent in the body. I'm present with the Lord. My soul goes to be with him. So, see ya. And then there comes a day when for all of those, the souls that are with the Lord, we call it the intermediate state, he's then going to resurrect my body, glorify it, 2.0 version, and he's going to give me a new one. And I get my heaven suit, which I'm going to serve him in forever. That's the way that the eschatology here works, okay? Which is why, by the way, I've made you promise me that we're going to do an open casket, right? Do you remember? We've talked about this. You promised me. There's always the one angry deacon who's like, wow, we don't do this, and he shuts it, and you open it back up. And you say, he made us promise year after year that we would look at that ugly dead man, right? And you've all agreed. I want you to come in here, and you better do the same thing. And when we're laying here, dead as a doornail, you open up that casket, all right? And you force everyone to look at the earth suit, which is gone, and you have them contemplate the fact that your soul has gone on, and very soon it's going to have its heaven suit. And you make sure that amidst the tears and the sadness that your family feels, they're also able to rejoice and to celebrate the fact that you have gone on to be with the Lord. Let me ask you a question. Who was the quintessential picture of earth suit to heaven suit in the Bible? Can you think of anyone, go back to those three things, anyone who had to die, maintained his identity, and yet came out of the grave different? Can you think of anybody who did this already? You're right, you can say it louder. This guy, this brother over here, he was like, Jesus! Right? Okay, question, right? Did Jesus actually have to die? Did he die? Yes, of course he did, right? Did he come out and did he have the marks on his hands still? Did he have the scar on his side still? So it's still Jesus, and his disciples, when he wanted them to, could recognize him. So here he comes, he dies, he has the identity, it's still him, but he was what? Different. Not just resuscitated, he was resurrected. And although he could eat, he didn't have to eat. And although he could hang out with the earthlings, he could also go through walls. And although he could travel around earth, he could also ascend interdimensionally into the heavenly realm. Friends, what you have in the glorified Christ is a snapshot of what you and I, Paul says, will forever become. Which leads us to the theology at the end there. Look at verse 45. That's where he finishes, see? He moves from the resurrection protest to the pictures to the parallels, and then he finishes in verse 45, reminding us that Jesus is, in fact, the prototype. You see that there in 45? So also it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living soul, and the last Adam, that's Jesus, became a life-giving spirit. So, simply put, Adam was the prototype of our natural bodies. But Christ is the prototype of our new bodies. And everyone in the room, we've all descended of Adam. You know, of Adam, we have a natural body and a natural soul. But in Christ, we get a new body and a new soul. And in verse 46, he clarifies, however, the spiritual isn't first, but the natural is, and then the spiritual. And all he's saying there is, you didn't exist until you were born naturally first. There's no spirit babies. The Mormons got that wrong. And if you ever watched that little Pixar movie, Boss Baby, where they come in chutes down into each home, got it wrong. You're born naturally. You were nothing. You were born naturally. And then comes the spiritual, which he talks about in verse 47. The first man is from the earth. That was Adam, and that was you when you were born. Earthy, he calls it. But the second man is from heaven. That's Christ, when on the inside you are taken over and given a new life by Christ. You're reborn. Verse 48, as is the earthy, so also are those who are earthy, and as is the heavenly, so also are those who are heavenly. He says, listen, everyone here was born earthy in Adam. But some of you are being reborn heavenly in Christ. And by the way, friends, the sad truth is all those who are born earthy and die earthy are going to forever be judged as earthy. But all those who are born earthy and then eventually born by Christ heavenly are going to forever be judged and viewed as heavenly. You're either one or the other. And he sums that up in verse 49. And just as we have borne the image of the earthy, we all are from Adam. We've all lived on earth. We've all been born physically. We shall also, meaning the Christian, bear the image of the heavenly. That's why these are the verses that you so often will hear read at a funeral of a Christian. Because when you're standing there at the cemetery, what you're looking at is really the seedbed of resurrection. Right there from that spot, right there from that tombstone, is where the Lord one day is going to take that soul and he's going to take that body and reunite it and make it new. That's why John said, it is yet appeared what we shall be in 1 John 3:2. All we know is that very soon we're going to be like him. That's why you have those famous songs that we all used to sing, like I Can Only Imagine. Because they remind us of the fact that although we are going to die, that our friends are going to die, that our family's going to die, that everyone we know is going to die, and we all are going to cry, one day we're going to be forever rejoicing in glory with our great and loving God. That's why these verses are the seedbed, the hope of resurrection, the hope of the future, the hope of our rejoicing. So let me just take a moment, and I want to ask you a question. All right? I want you to do me a favor, okay? Here we go. And then I'm going to just give you a couple little 1-minute takeaways, and you can go home and think about dying. All right, you ready? So, just real quick, all right? I want to do this once and for all in this church. Do you guys give me your word? Now, I already talked with Bree. I know she's okay with it, so we're good. If I die before you, are we 100% committed, number one, to an open casket? Are you with me on that? Okay, thousands of people have now heard that. There's no going back. Okay? Number two, you ready? I need you to do me a favor. It's okay if there's a little bit of sadness, you know. I know most of you are going, I'm not going to be sad. We'll be happy when you're gone. All right? But let's all make an agreement together, okay? And I want you to talk to your spouses about this before you go home. Ready? Show of hands. Who really believes that Jesus Christ is their Savior and their Lord? Show of hands. Okay, now, number two, ready? Who really believes that they're going to be with him one day in a resurrected body serving him forever? Show of hands. Okay, ready for number three? Who thinks we should do a little more celebrating at our funerals instead of crying? Now we have an agreement. Why don't we start having some memorials and some funerals where we spend a little bit of time commemorating the person and a lot more time getting ready and appreciating their graduation to be with Christ? Why don't we sing some songs that remind, can you imagine if your friends and family who you've been talking to about Jesus for the last 15 years, and they walk into a funeral for you, and the friends and family there are singing praises to the Lord, and they have smiles on their faces because you graduated to glory, the impact that would have on their life? They'd walk in and go, I don't know what's going on here. This is a little weird, but man, it might be true. Finish it with me, because it's Christ in you, the hope of what? The hope of glory. So just real quick, write these down. I'll just give them to you in 20 seconds. Number one, what you have right here is an answer to all of your insecurity. If you came in the room, by the way, and you're a young person and you feel ugly, you don't like your body, maybe you were tormented when you were younger, people at school make fun of you, maybe you're just a person who always feels lonely, you look in the mirror and you don't like the way God made you, what you just learned right here is that God in his sovereignty designed you exactly as he designed you, the way he designed you. And guess what? Who you are is who you're going to be. And although it'll be a better version of yourself, it's still going to be you. So why don't you use the years you have left on planet Earth to glorify him and run hard? The sovereign God, before time, decided to make you who he made you. So instead of looking in the mirror and going, oh, woe is me, I don't like this, just be thankful and say, Lord, you value this, so I'm going to value this, and I'm going to use it for your glory. He made you. But let me take it from the external into the internal. You ready for this? What you have here also is the answer to something so common these days, which is, ready? And you hear this a lot in the LGBTQIA, I was born this way. Well, I was born this way. I was born gay. I was born abused. I was born in a disability. I was born without your white privilege or whatever. I was born addicted. You hear that all the time now. I was born on the streets. I'm a born product of my environment, and on it goes. You know what this text does? It gives you the opportunity to take your friend who's saying that at Starbucks by the shoulders and look him right in the eye and say, okay, I'm fine with that. That's why the Bible says, and Jesus said, you have to be born again. Oh, and by the way, I was born that way too. I was born real lustful, and I was born real greedy, and I was born real slanderous. I was born real, what Paul calls earthy, just like you. But guess what? The Bible tells us and Jesus tells us that we don't have to just be born earthy. We can be born heavenly. All we got to do is be born again. Oh, and by the way, if you're born earthy, you're going to die. If you're born heavenly, you're going to forever live. And if you're here in the room right now, if you're sitting here, you're literally just sitting here right now, and you're going, what's all this Jesus stuff about? Christianity and churches and singing these songs. Why in the moment of their death are they still able to praise and be excited? This is the reason why. Because everyone that's a believer is not just born earthy, they're also born heavenly, and they know that this is not the end, it's just the beginning. And you right now can have that same hope. All you need to do is turn from yourself and from your sin, that's earth, and turn to heaven and receive the free offer of Jesus Christ, who came and he lived a perfect life and he died a substitutionary death and he rose on the third day according to the scriptures, and he said, I paid the price for you. And the moment you receive that, you bow in allegiance to that, he takes over your heart and you are no longer earthy. You are now forever heavenly, and you have a new body that's going to come. So receive him. Bend your knee. Trust him with all that you are. Do not walk another day on planet Earth mired by your selfish sin.